Masquerade cast on this Sunday evening. With me tonight, we have the usual face of Peter Ray Allison.
Good evening, everyone.
And our special guest tonight, we have Khaldoun Khelil. Khalili, sorry.
Khalil, yeah.
Khalil, sorry, I was right the first time. My apologies. Oh, today is going off so well.
Good start, Matt. Good start.
I know. So, Khaldoun, tell us about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What's your thing?
Well, I write for role-playing games. I write for Vampire the Masquerade. I've written for some Cthulhu books and some, freelance Dungeons and Dragons, that kind of thing. But yeah, mostly I've written on Vampire and Chronicles of Darkness, the old Vampire line, after they, closed down Masquerade for a few years. But now I mostly work on V5, Vampire 5th edition.
Again, V5 is very different to the original Vampire the Masquerade. It feels almost like a reboot, but still maintaining continuity. Would that be a fair assessment of V5?
Yeah, I guess it's a reboot in the sense that the lore is still there, but very much it's not really in the spotlight anymore. So the lore is there and you can delve into the lore, but it's a lot more approachable to new players because they don't have to read a mountain of lore. I remember when Vampire was in its heyday in the 90s, you'd walk into any role-playing game store and there'd be an entire wall of Vampire supplements, sometimes with, strange names, and it would be hard to make heads or tail of it, I'm sure, if you were a new player. V5 really doesn't put the lore front and center. So in a sense, it's a reboot in that sense, in its presentation and themes. But technically, it's still the same game.
Yeah. As well, I'm a massive World of Darkness fan, but Mattison, so could you kind of, I suppose some of our audience aren't as up to date with V5. So could you explain what V5 is and its background and basis?
Sure. Well, Vampire the Masquerade, the 5th edition, basically it takes the essential conceit of Vampire the Masquerade that you are playing the vampire and that you're fighting against, this internal beast to retain your humanity. That's kind of the core gameplay. And you're trying to hide yourself and vampiric society from mortals at large while you try to, survive and prosper. And in 5th edition, one of the major twists is that there's secret governmental agencies that know about vampires and are actively hunting them across the world. So keeping yourself a secret is more important than it had been in the past, where it was kind of almost a side project, keeping yourself hidden, unless that was specifically the focus of the game you were playing. But now it's an issue throughout the game and has more of a spotlight. As well as in older editions of Vampire the Masquerade, there was something kind of called the War of Ages, which was basically about the young vampires versus the old vampires. In 5th edition, the spotlight's firmly on the young vampires, and the older vampires have mostly exited the scene. There's several reasons for that in the plot of the game, for why the older vampires are no longer, in your face, basically controlling everything.
So basically, the game essentially sets up a massive power vacuum.
Correct. Yes.
Right. Okay. One thing I really liked with V5 was it's, when I said reboot, I suppose it reboots the system in many ways. It's essentially very much a different system, especially in terms of feeding and. Well, before it's like a blood pool where you kind of tracked how many blood points you had and feeding and using abilities. Here, it's more about the need to feed rather than the actual feeding itself.
Yes, yeah. I would say that I'd say the original Vampire the Masquerade, when it came out in the 90s, it was groundbreaking thematically. Groundbreaking in the type of role-play experience it was asking you as a player and a storyteller to produce at the table. But mechanically, it was very much an old school system. It was very combat heavy. To be honest, it was basically just Shadowrun with D10s. So it was very mechanically, let's just be honest. So it really didn't break any ground mechanically, except maybe the blood pool system in some way. But yeah, now V5 is a complete overhaul of the system. It no longer focuses on combat. Combat is basically, you're basically supposed to be over with combat in 3 rounds, basically, and whoever has the edge is basically the one who takes the game in a sense. So that individual discipline powers are now a lot more impactful because they have to basically make a difference in just a few rounds. And also, yes, as you said, the blood pool is gone. Now hunger is done in a more what I would say is a much more streamlined way, and the kind of way that hunger can come upon you without you being ready for it. You can no longer gauge it. It's no longer a mini game, hunger. Now hunger is something that can suddenly sneak upon you. You make a bad roll on a hunger roll. You've been using disciplines all night without any problem, didn't get any hungrier, then suddenly you feel the hunger come upon you as you've pushed your luck a little too far. I think that's and that, which I feel is more in line with modern RPGs, is a mechanic that enforces the themes, which in older RPGs was just not really something that was done with most games.
So how does that work? I'm a complete noob when it comes to Vampire the Masquerade. I play D&D and I've done a bit of Call of Cthulhu, and that's pretty much it. How does that work? So you make a bad roll, you become hungry. Does that mean how does that work? How does that make you sort of make the character react?
Well, I mean, it depends. So strictly on the hunger system, basically what you have is something called hunger dice. As your hunger rating increases, technically it's from 0 to 5. You swap out dice in your die pools because, as I said, it's basically still kind of like Shadowrun. You're using D10 die pools, and as you get hungrier, you're basically swapping out a number of dice in all your die pools equal to your hunger rating. So if your hunger is 3, you would swap in 3 dice to the die pool that you'd have to mark specially. And then if those dice come up successes or failures, then some things can be triggered. Messy criticals, bestial failures, and that can play itself out in the role playing. So if you succeed on a roll, even if it's a critical success, but it was your hunger dice that let you succeed on that roll, then you will succeed, but you will have basically relied on your vampiric nature to succeed. So that could threaten the masquerade, that kind of thing. And then obviously it can also trigger, your specific compulsions for your clans and such. And there are also other systems that reinforce it thematically as well, not just the hunger system.
Yeah, because it bakes in the whole kind of vampiric need to feed into the system, where before it was more like a resource tracking management system. Right. And I found like vampire, especially in the early days, it could either be like a vampiric version of EastEnders, all the way up to Avengers with a blood fetish. Right.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. I mean, a lot of games. I mean, my very earliest vampire games that I got to play in, because I'm still a forever DM, so very rarely would I get to ever play. But I remember the very first vampire games I got to play in, I think like 2 or 3 characters had katanas and trench coats. So
the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like the katanas and trench coat was very much a thing for the 90s, and also like it was massively just. I think partly because of Underworld films.
Yeah, Underworld, Blade, The Crow.
Exactly, yeah, and like it's just like very much an aesthetic choice, which kind of blended itself very well to vampire. Unfortunately, stuck there.
Yes.
So how did you become involved in writing for Vampire?
Yeah, that's a tough question, I guess. I'm not 100% sure. Basically, my first book for Vampire the Masquerade was, I believe, for the 2nd edition or maybe revised. It was in 2000. I believe it was Cairo by Night. I was a project consultant on that, and I wrote a few things in the book, though I'm only credited as a project consultant. And for that one, they needed somebody who knew something about Cairo, obviously, and back then it was I don't know if it was easier, but it was more common to just be in touch with the people writing the games. and not in a social media way, but on the phone at conventions. I think I met Justin Khelil back then at a vampire LARP, though I don't think he was playing in the LARP, to be honest. So I just got the call from the authors, and they asked me to consult on the book because I know about Cairo and Arabic culture and Muslim culture. And then from there, it was just a matter of using my network and meeting people and talking to them and doing the writing. That's often the most important thing is if you do the writing, even if it's not really good at first, if you get it in on time, that can account for a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if editors have got something to work on, they're happy. It's when editors don't have anything to work on, that's when they get a bit, grumpy.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Yeah, and I found like from my experience as a freelance writer and journalist, I've raised some of my early stuff way back in the early 2010s. Think, oh, I could do that so much better now, but because I was meeting every deadline, editors were coming back to me and said, okay, and give me more stuff because I was hitting the deadline. I wasn't letting them down, and I think that counts just as much as writing ability now. Just having that ability to hit the deadlines and do what the editor says.
Right. Yes. Now I can miss deadlines.
I'll never say yes to that. I'll never admit to that. Honestly.
So, it says the Black Hand behind you. What's the reference to that then?
Oh yes. So V5. There's of the sex in V5. One of the sects in Vampire the Masquerade that's always been there and has been not necessarily core to the game in the past, but has either been antagonist but usually playable is the Sabbat, the quote unquote evil vampires. And so we just released 2 books actually. The V5 book for the Sabbat, it's called Sabbat the Black Hand, and that's the Renegade official Sabbat. That's just an antagonist book. Not a monster manual, but really a storyteller's guide for how to bring the Sabbat into your chronicle and how your players who aren't playing Sabbat would interact with them. Then recently they allowed for V5 products on the Storyteller's Vault, which is the community content. And so I and a few other authors got together and we produced The Black Hand Playing the Sabbat, which is the cover behind me by Mark Kelly, who's incredible cover artist. And for that, we basically took the foundation of the V5 book, the official book, and made, a book for fans and the communities if they wish to play Sabbat. Because in my experience, having played Vampire for so long, Sabbat fans, they love to play Sabbat. Like that's why they come to Vampire for, and we felt that we could present them something that would hopefully scratch that itch.
How would you describe the Sabbat? I mean, there's so many different kind of interpretations of who and what they are. How would you describe them?
Well, yeah, that's tough. I mean, I guess in their classically, the Sabbat is in some sense a cult. It is a organization, of a religious organization in a sense of vampires that have totally shed their humanity and oppose the other vampires who wish to keep pretending that they're just dead humans, that they're not something completely different, and they're fooling themselves that the elder hidden vampires aren't controlling everything. And since vampires are better than humans, the vampire should be in control of everything anyway. That's kind of the basic core of the Sabbat. I guess in the newest edition, they are less interested in the politics and the kind of status quo, this kind of Cold War situation they'd been with the other vampires for so long. They're now in what I would consider to be something we could all appreciate. They're in this mode of we've got to do something now. It's too late, to wait. We can't do piecemeal measures anymore. In our introduction to the book, we have a line that says, if it's the end of the world, what are we waiting for? Which I feel is a line that all millennials can appreciate, because really what the Sabbat is facing in their point of view is what Gehenna. They're facing a a rising up of these ancient vampires that are going to kill them all the younger vampires, and who knows what they're going to do after that. So in the face of that, what wouldn't you be willing to do in a sense to save the world?
Yeah, I mean, like, I remember playing like the first edition Vampire the Masquerade, where the Sabbat were purely an antagonistic organization. Then it kind of, as editions went on, they became a playable faction. But then with V5, they made the decision of kind of rolling them back and being too purely antagonistic. So why was that? Why did they kind of just, when the Renegade's official release, be purely a sort of GM handbook rather than a playable faction?
Well, I mean, I'm not there when they make those decisions, but I would say that from my point of view, I would say that it's because V5 very much gets back into the roots of Vampire the Masquerade, which is the battle to retain your humanity, that kind of personal horror story. I mean, the politics. I mean, I think the tagline for V5 is actually a game of political horror. So the politics still figure importantly, and as you play Vampire, often you can kind of ignore the mortals on some level once you've insulated yourself from the mortal world. But with some of the mechanics, not just hunger, but the touchstone mechanics and the conviction mechanics, and the chronicle tenant mechanics, they've basically recentered the idea that this is a game of you and your humanity, and basically what you're willing to do to get along in the vampiric world, and how much you're willing to sacrifice humanity. So the Sabbat, which follow paths of enlightenment, which are intrinsically inhumane, that's not really the game they're playing. So they don't want to basically, this is strictly my opinion, I don't think they wanted to dilute the core gameplay experience with the Sabbat as a playable faction. That would be my guess.
Yeah, because very much V5 kind of recenters the whole point of Vampire the Masquerade in the sense of kind of refocusing it back onto the personal horror of you're a vampire, what you're going to do to kind of keep your humanity alive. And again, like the touchstones is kind of centers the play on that and focuses them that they need to keep them alive and present and to retain their humanity. And I mean, I've read the Black Hand source book you worked on, and that's fantastic. I mean, the quality of it. I mean, when you say like it's a community storyteller vault content, but it's really professionally done. I mean, like the design of it, the artwork, and the layout, and just it's not just a bunch of PDF pages all typewritten. This is, which is, I mean, especially when it's just someone working on it, this is like really looks like a professional. Well, as it is a professional piece of content that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, well, thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, we have been getting that feedback a lot. I mean, I think that's partly because we got Mark Kelly, who was very kind to do the cover for our book. And so obviously just from the jump, it looks like a lot of the other, official products because it has that, quality cover. And we did our best to, use the same fonts and layouts. The Storyteller Vault has, for the most part, the templates and art packs that they give as a default are very good. And so just from those bones, I think if you put in the time, and it is a lot of time, you can put things together. And I did the art layout and the development and all of that. And I actually have some professional experience with that myself, from desktop publishing in the 90s and early aughts. So my first professional jobs in the energy industry were with newsletters, writing about, oil and natural gas and that kind of thing. So I was able to kind of brush up those old skills, see what InDesign looks like now, and put it to use. So yeah, we definitely wanted to deliver a book that, if it was printed, you'd be happy to have it on your shelf next to the other Sabbat book or the Camarilla or the core book and such.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Matt.
It's just because again, I'm completely naive to the whole sort of kind of world that it is. Now we've talked to a few people about Mage.
Love that game.
So you're talking about keeping your humanity, and sort of the Masquerade is sort of obviously not showing that you are a vampire, which seems similar along the lines of a mage, where you don't want to be seen as being a mage. You got to hide it. Is there sort of kind of a connection between them, or are they in the same world? Aren't they? Are they in the same?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're in the same world. Yeah. Yes. All right.
Well,
okay.
I mean, there's technically no 5th edition of Mage. Well, not technically. There is no 5th edition of Mage out currently. I don't know what they're going to do with that line. But yes, Mage classically is one of the World of Darkness, playable splats or arenas.
Is there?
Yeah, but
Do they ever have any sort of interaction between the cross pollination between mage and vampires?
Yes, I mean, in V5 that doesn't really seem to be a focus of the game. What's called crossover in World of Darkness. It's very very classically called crossover, and there are lots of heated arguments about whether crossover is good. And different editions of the game promoted crossover to different levels. Earlier, they very kind of downplayed crossover, and all the different splats had basically kind of antagonist blocks. So like a mage in the first edition, in the first few editions of Vampire, I think it would basically be, this is, the stat block for a mage. Like, don't bother buying the mage book. But obviously, once they had, mage books and lots of mage books, they tried to do the crossover thing, I would say to limited success. I never really saw very much crossover. Because usually the mechanics were so different. I think Chronicles of Darkness, where Vampire the Requiem and Mage the Awakening and all that does it a little better because it's more of a unified system mechanically. I don't know. I can't really talk about the other World of Darkness books that I've worked on other than Vampire because none of them are out yet. But I really can't say how well the mechanics will jive together, going forward.
Yeah, well, I remember playing like V20, M20, and all that. And whilst essentially they are the same system, the storyteller system, but when it starts diverging is in their respective powers. Like the vampires have disciplines, the mages have the spheres, and at that point it starts getting very flaky. And yeah, and it can be done with a lot of care and thought. I played a mage in a World of Darkness LARP way back in the day, and that got interesting when the character had forces and could conjure fire at will. That became very interesting for everyone else, especially the vampires. Now, but again, it just became a bit. And now, what I would say is thematically they are similar. Like vampires have the Masquerade to hide behind. Mages have the kind of paradox, so they can't really overtly display their powers, otherwise they get hit by their paradox hammer. And werewolves, like Werewolf the Masquerade, they have the their own form of obfuscation. Like basically, if a human sees
the veil,
the thank you, yes, completely blanks on that. Yeah, basically, if a normal human sees a werewolf in full Krynos form, in their full werewolf form, they just go run screaming and think, oh, it's not real, it can't be real. So thematically they are similar, and mechanically at a certain level they are similar, but their respective powers just start going off in different directions. At that point, you can't really. I think, as I understand it, Chronicles of Darkness kind of baked in the crossovers from the very beginning. Would that be a fair assessment? Or at least their interoperability?
Yes, yeah. I mean, later on, they would bake in more crossover. I think they actually made a campaign which was very crossover heavy. Yeah, so that was a bit later on. But yes, from the outset, the mechanics were meant to be totally interchangeable. There was one core book for all the lines. So if you wanted to play Vampire or Werewolf, you had to buy the World of Darkness book to get the core mechanics. So yeah, so I would agree with that. The interoperability was there. But if you, as a storyteller, wanted to make a game that was crossover, heavy, or had different kinds of players from different areas or splats, you would really have to give that some, careful thought.
Very much so. I mean, I think the only game where they kind of really, especially in the classic World of Darkness games like the M20, Mage 20, and so on, is in the Technocracy Reloaded book, where basically all the other supernatural elements were targets for the technocracy, and that way that wasn't so much a crossover, but target practice for the technocracy essentially, because they were on a hunt for any reality deviants, and that included vampires, werewolves, and so on. But yeah, but again, like, how did you become involved in V5 itself? How did that come about?
Well, that's a good question too. I think I met. Okay, well, this is gonna sound weird, okay, but I was living in Los Angeles for a while, and I was dropping my son off at summer camp. He was going this, comedy summer camp in Hollywood. So I was dropping him off at summer camp in Hollywood, where I was living at the time. And after I dropped him off, across the street, I saw Martin Erickson sitting on a street corner, talking to a friend of his, I guess. It was very early in the morning too. I didn't have to be at work for a while. So I just crossed the street and I said, hey, Martin. And I think we'd met in the past, I think at a convention or something. And so we just sat down and started chatting. And then, I think through Martin, I met, everybody else, Kareem and Johanna and a few other the V5 people. I think Jason Carl, I don't think he was actually working for Paradox at that point. So yeah, it was chance and going to conventions, and then just chatting, and that was that. And then I think the first thing I wrote for V5 was for the Camarilla book. They asked me to take a look over the Banu Hakim stuff before it was published. So I mean, I wasn't really a sensitivity reader, but I gave them some notes here and there on that stuff. They took most of them, if not all. I think it turned out okay. Well, not okay. It turned out very good, especially compared to some of the stuff for the old Assamites. Yeah. And then officially, the first thing I ever wrote for V5 was the Camarilla book rewrites. Actually, I rewrote the Gehenna War section and some meta plot about the Beckoning and the Gehenna War and all that.
Yeah, because I do know the Camarilla source book kind of got a bit of flack when it was initially released, but to their credits, Paradox took action, basically kind of just cancelled the book. Rather kind of brought the book back in, rewrote it, and then reissued it again with their apologies. I think that was a well managed essentially. Yep, we need to redo this. And
yeah, unheard of. I mean, I don't know if I've ever heard of that ever happening in the how many decades I've been playing RPGs. Yeah, I mean, they even had an editorial review board. I was part of an editorial review board that reviewed both the Anarch and the Camarilla book. Basically, we all separately went through the books and then, submitted our editorial notes, which I don't know about everyone else's, but I know some of mine were implemented in at least the Camarilla book, not really the Anarch book, because the Anarch book had a few things that they were concerned about, but for the most part, I feel the Anarch book didn't get nowhere near as much heat as the Camarilla book. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, is it worth mentioning just like the scale of it?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
yeah, because basically they were referencing real world atrocities as basically being the results of vampire manipulation, and it was untasteful is the best way I can politely put it. But like I said, the Paradox did take action, brought the book back in, redid it, and reissued it.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I have no idea about the behind the scenes or the before all that. I can only speak of the reaction because that was what I was involved with. But I can say that the reaction is very good, and I think that most experienced writers who work and developers who work with dark material will tell you that you can talk about the monsters, but you should never excuse the real world monsters of the humans doing bad things. Yeah.
Very much agree. Like as I recall, I mean, barring a few exceptions, again, in the generally World of Darkness approach to being atrocities and real world monsters has been that wasn't vampires or werewolves and midgets. No, that was just evil people being evil.
Yes, I think by Revised they had perfected that formula of vampires, and definitely in Chronicles of Darkness with the Vampire the Requiem,
Yeah.
they perfected this formula that vampires will take advantage of human atrocities, but they are not the perpetrators or the originators of those thoughts. That's strictly with the humans. And personally, from a writing horror context, it's always scarier when a human does something terrible because they don't have the excuse of, well, the beast made me do it. Like, well, no, you don't have that. You don't have a beast.
Yeah, very much. I think it's like having someone that takes advantage of it is, you can reference real world elements, but it never excuses it.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And again, like, how did you become involved in like the Sabbat book? Like,
oh well, I've been speaking with people at White Wolf, as it was back then, since the very early days of V5 before the book came out, about what the Sabbat would be like in the new edition, and writing a book for them about it and the such in some capacity. Since back then. So I think my name had always been in the mix of potential writers for the book. So when it finally came down time to write the book, it was one of the first times in my career where someone called me. So they said we're going to do this.
Savored that experience.
Huh?
Savored that experience.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't happen often. It doesn't matter how long you've been writing, especially or freelancing. I mean, the quickest way to starve in writing or freelance is to develop a pick me attitude, like that kind of, well, if they don't pick me, I'm not the best for the job. Well, no. Trust me. Like, people appreciate when you come to them and say, I would like to work on this. Not only does it show your interest and all that, but people are busy. They're not going to remember you, even if you don't have a very unique name like my own.
Yeah, well, I can speak like I'm a freelance writer and journalist myself. Write for the BBC, Computer Weekly, do a fair bit on cybersecurity, and I think I'll say 5 times I've written literally hundreds of articles in the past 5 years. 5 times I've been asked to do something for someone.
Yeah, that's about right. That sounds about that's about the right ratio. 5 to like a billion. Yeah.
Yeah, and it just you can't. You have to be out there. You say, hi, do you want this? Hi, can I do this for you? And you have to really kind of get over that sort of
Is that how you do it,
nervousness.
Pete? Because I've never thought about it, to be honest, Pete. That's your livelihood and stuff. Is it? You just sort of kind of do you go out on business meals and stuff like that? You wine and dine people to get business?
I wish I could bill that as expense. No, I email people. I will kind of won't derail too much from but this is for you, Khaldoun, but like I will email people. I will say, hi, I've got this idea for an article, and kind of give them a brief pitch of like what it'll be about, who I'll speak to, and are you interested? And that's pretty much the general. Occasionally I'll kind of speak to, and like I will email and say, oh, by the way, I'm going to this event. Would you like some interviews from these people? Like, for example, if I'm in November last year, I was at World's Comic Con where I spoke to the actors who played the pilots in Star Wars, the Star Wars film, developer pilots, and said, listen, these people are here. Would you be interested in a conversation with them? And actually one person said, yeah, actually, I would actually. So that's how it comes about typically. But I can't just basically sit by my keyboard waiting for the email to ping on, hi, we would like you to write an article, because no, I'd starve.
Exactly.
How does that kind of reflect on yourself, Khaldoun?
Well, I mean, starting out, it's very much a face-to-face thing. Like, people want to see you, they want to get an idea of you for RPG writing, at least in my experience. I'm not quite sure what it is now as far as, getting your start. But for me, it was really conventions were kind of a game changer. I'd written here and there, as a hobby while I did, my full-time work. But then once I started getting into conventions and, wanted to get into writing more as a full-time basis, that's when really I saw more work, once I made those personal connections. And then after that, once I know people on a personal level, then yes, I can, email them or Slack them or DM them, whatever is available to me. As long as as long as you're not, tweeting about it out in the open air, then yeah, it's usually any basis to get the work.
Yeah, I think until anything's published, everything is under NDA. You just do not talk about it, especially if you can. I've just got this great content. No, can't say anything. Can't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I think back in the day, it was a little looser, especially when you were just talking to other professionals in the business or other freelancers. Now, I definitely feel as video game companies kind of come into the RPG space for those IPs and such. And there have more of an impact on the culture of RPGs. Now, yes, now NDAs are completely sacrosanct. Like now, I don't know if can't's the right word, but I definitely don't risk talking to other authors or whatever. I have to be a lot more tight-lipped. It was more collegiate in the past, where you'd be like, oh, I'm working on this, and you discuss things and figure things out, get ideas. Now it's much more siloed, and it's much more about IP. Which isn't a bad thing, because these companies are bringing a lot of resources into the gaming space that we didn't really have in the past. RPGs are very much a tight margin business, and the IPs were never really valued the way they should have been. But now you see companies like Paradox, which value the World of Darkness IP. They value the BattleTech IP. You see the Shadowrun video games, which are so good. They see how important and powerful. Not to mention Cyberpunk by the incredible Mike Pondsmith, which has been around forever as a game, and is now finally getting the kind of accolades it deserves. As an idea, as a thought.
Yeah, I spoke to Mike Pondsmith just after Cyberpunk 2077 was announced. So we're talking early 2013, and it was just before the media blackout came down from CD Projekt Red. And apparently he'd been approached several times by various video game companies, and for one reason or another, it just never happened. Sometimes they approached them with ideas of like, we'll just reskin a first-person shooter, and stick to Cyberpunk 2020.
Apologies, everybody. OBS just kind of went down there, and for unknown reasons, decided it didn't want to reconnect. So I can only assume that the horrendous storms has had some effect on it. But yeah, we're back again, and we will finish off with Pete, who I think was talking about Cyberpunk 2022. No, it wasn't 22. We're in 2022. Oh my god, what's going on? Oh my god, my brain just not with it today in any way, shape. Anyway, Pete, Cyberpunk, carry on.
Yeah, Cyberpunk 2020 there've been several attempts to kind of translate into a video game. Most of them were kind of basically a reskin job of an existing first-person shooter, and then slapping the Cyberpunk 2020 brand on it. As said, hey, it's a Cyberpunk 2020 game. But Mike Pondsmith, the creator of Cyberpunk 2020, said, nope, I do not want just a rebranding. That's not what I want. It'd be just wrong. Now, but several companies did approach him with some really good ideas. I think the most prominent one was someone who came with a really good idea. They'd start developing on it, and then about midway through development, the head of the company that was developing this Cyberpunk 2020 game really got papers from the American government telling him to re-enlist. So he had to basically rejoin the army again, and that obviously completely canned development for them. Essentially being quiet. I mean, Cyberpunk V3 was a bit hit or mixed, to be fair. It didn't make the splash Mike Pondsmith had hoped for, and pretty much everything was quiet around Cyberpunk 2020 for several years. And then this news came out from almost nowhere saying, hey, there's going to be a Cyberpunk video game called 2077 released by the guys behind The Witcher 3, CD Projekt Red. And that kickstarted massive interest in the video games. I wrote an article about it for a magazine I cannot talk about because of contracts. Yay. And then from that, they kind of got interested in the role-playing game again, which we got Cyberpunk Red. So yeah, it's been a massive interest in the cyberpunk setting as a whole, really. I mean, have you played Cyberpunk 2077, Khaldun?
Yes, yeah, I've played it on PC. It was very good. I played through it a few times. I thought the story elements were, really interesting. I really loved The Witcher 3. I thought that was probably one of the better video games I've, ever played. So I had very high expectations, and for the most part, I would say, they met it with the story elements. Yeah, for Cyberpunk 2077, and I feel they really captured most of the spirit of the RPG, but as with most things, there's some things RPGs can do that video games cannot. And in a setting like Cyberpunk, there's especially in a setting like Cyberpunk, it is very difficult to program in all the different permutations and possibilities in that kind of setting. So I thought the video game was about as good as it could be, given the limits of a video game.
Do you think they overpromised with the video game, and that's why you had so many issues at launch?
I have no idea. I mean, I doubt it. I suspect the major issue was, mostly just technical and time. That's how these things go. I've been on the side involved with some video game development, and I can say that it often comes down to a lot of ideas, a lot of problems that come up that you have to deal with eventually, and you just don't have the time or the money in the end to put in the features at the same time you're squashing the bugs.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not involved at all in CD Projekt Red, but my suspicion is that they wanted to release the game in 2020, and it's because Cyberpunk 2020 and the name of the game, and they kind of wanted to hit the kind of Christmas 2020 season, and so they kind of almost released it while they were still in bud squashing mode. But I will say this: they absolutely nailed the aesthetic of Cyberpunk 2020. Really, it's like it wasn't just like black and chrome. There's quite a few Cyberpunk settings that are really just like lots of black and lots of chrome. They've really kind of gone for kind of almost psychedelic, neon lit future. And I remember speaking to Mike Pondsmith a few years ago, and he said there's a very specific aesthetic and tone to Cyberpunk. It's like basically walking out the bar late at night, when it just after it's rained, and going, so what now? And kind of they really kind of nailed that sort of kind of neon psychedelia of Cyberpunk 2020.
I'm sort of. It's good that he sort of, instead of just going with the first computer game company who wanted to make a game of his RPG, that he sort of waited for one that could probably do it justice. Granted, obviously, all bugs and stuff aside, it is, and I've not played it yet because I was going to wait for all the bugs to get fixed and stuff. But it is apparently a very good game when it works properly. But you've got a lot of companies like Games Workshop and stuff. They'll just give their IP to anybody, and I personally think that damages your brand slightly. Because you're just known as sort of having naff games and stuff. I talk about Games Workshop because they're not as bad now, but they used to be really bad. Literally just give it to anybody, and they had some really naff stuff, naff movies, naff sort of games, and I think you really need to sort of be picky with who takes on your IP.
Have you played any of the V5 games at all? On the there's the Blood Hunt.
The only one I've actually played, the only V5 video game, other than they had this Vampire Jam recently, actually, where they had community content. People make video games, and a couple of those were very good. I played one where it was kind of a almost like city resource manager with you had a coterie, and it was very political and had timers. It reminded me of Cult Simulator from Steam. A game I like. I think it was called Praxis, and that was very good. But as far as the official releases, I actually haven't played any of them except of the new games, Blood Hunt, the Battle Royale, which I like. I like Battle Royale, so that's perfect for me. Play Nosferatu in a Battle Royale, sure. And of course, just so you guys know, you'll have to reinstall it now. Bloodlines, from the original Vampire the Masquerade game.
Oh, that was such a good game.
Yeah,
That was
that was a
really, really good game. Yeah, I mean, I just love the music in it. They really nailed the kind of feel of it. And just walking around the city at night, and just like you could look up and see the rain falling. Which, I mean, we're talking like late '90s, early 2000 graphics.
Yep.
So it wasn't the most visually stunning game, but immersiveness and storytelling was just fantastic. Some fantastic writing.
Yeah, they just released the soundtrack actually. Yeah.
Okay, right. I know what I'm doing after this then.
I didn't realize it was that old, to be honest. I don't,
Yeah.
That being said, obviously the RPG, I know the RPG, they were playing it in my uni when I was at university in 2000. It just boggles my brain that's 22 years ago. In my mind, 2000 was like yesterday, and
Isn't the 30th anniversary of Vampire the Masquerade this year, 2022?
I believe so. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so we talked about again. That's 3 years ago. I mean, are you got anything planned for the 30th anniversary of Vampire and V5? Well, not V5.
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, it's
Okay.
not that's not. I'm not breaking by any NDAs by saying I have no knowledge of any of that. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So Pete was sort of talking to you before the podcast about what you do as well with the security side of things. Can you talk us to us about that?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, I've never worked for any government or governmental agencies. I've strictly been an academic when it comes to counterterrorism and counterintelligence. That's my graduate degree. I have a master's in international security policy from Columbia University. And my focus was, counterintelligence and I guess what you would call third world security policy, especially in the Middle East and North Africa.
Wow.
I worked at the Middle East Institute for about 2 years as their non-resident energy and security scholar.
Oh.
Okay, so I mean that's kind of massive. Just in one hand you would be talking about vampires and werewolves, on the other hand you're writing about security policy. That's complete. That's complete.
I mean, kind of. Well, in high school, I mean, I didn't plan for this, but in high school, I read The Prize by Daniel Yergin, which is basically the history of oil.
Yeah.
And so it basically goes from the very start of oil as a natural resource all the way to the modern day, at least back in, I assume they've updated it by now. It's been a long time since I was in high school. And at the same time, I read Dune by Frank Herbert.
Yeah.
So I read those books side to side, and they were very good companion pieces. One was about, the real world exploitation, colonialism, and, just the way our entire planet runs on these fossil fuels and what that means for us on several levels, not just economically, but environmentally and politically. And why, these countries that have these resources or are near these resources are constantly being, the word we use is penetrated. Constantly being penetrated by outside actors, usually Western powers, European and American, because they want what they have. And Dune very much explores that. And I worked on the Dune RPG, actually, the one that was just recently released.
Wow, okay.
So I mean, I bring that up because I've always been interested in politics, human behavior, and how we have to, as people, read between the lines of what's happening and what's presented to us. Because a lot of times things are presented to us like, oh, that's a violent part of the world, or they don't have their, stuff together over there because of, their religion or the way they're raised or their culture. And we don't talk about, well, they were occupied by a foreign country by 150 years because they wanted their gold or their oil or their diamonds. And so when those countries left, they left them in ruins, usually, or strictly as, suppliers of this resource with no other, infrastructure. So for me, it really spoke to this kind of not really hidden world, but it definitely showed that we have to be circumspect when we're presented with these ideas, whether in the media or from our governments, that there are people in this world that, are in their desperate situations or positions because they somehow deserve it or it's their fault, without us thinking about, the material circumstances they may have been in that were caused by outside actors.
Products of their environment, basically.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a very that. I mean, I don't know if they say that over here, but that's a very American term. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Matt.
No, I was just say it's very much the case that you can just blame people for, and I try to think about it myself. If you're, there's a lot of sort of, how do you put this without small-mindedness in the UK, in Northern Ireland, where I'm from, especially in small villages and things like that, where it's like, and they have views that sort of maybe more worldly people wouldn't hold because they think, but because they're products of their environment, all they have is what they know, and it's easy just to blame them for being them when really there's more to it. Schooling, government, everything like that, and it's all too easy just to just blame or point fingers at when really there is a lot more depth to it and something that you need to sort of kind of bear in mind. And I'm by all means, not by all means, I'm very I'm guilty of pointing fingers, especially in Northern Ireland, quite a lot. But I try my best to sort of kind of say, right, there is more to this than just what it is, what the facade is, what the front of it is.
Yeah, I think there's like too much. It's too easy to simplify what is a complex problem.
Yes, I think
that's the sound bites.
Yeah,
would that be fair, Khaldoun? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the main way I guess I run into it is that in the U.S. There's not a lot of emphasis on critical analysis of the media we consume in our schooling and in our society. It's kind of seen as I guess snooty or putting on airs, that kind of thing, which is seen as bad, and that's something reinforced by the media society here. So it's almost a feature, it's not a bug of our school system, that critical analysis is just not something that children engage in and will not engage in until they're out of high school on a real level. Like at best, they'll read Catcher in the Rye in high school and get whatever terrible message they get out of that, without a lot of real in-depth thinking on, well, what does this mean? What is behind the words? What is the subtext? And that can be very difficult as a writer because a lot of times you don't, and especially in a role-playing game like Vampire the Masquerade or even Dune or even Cthulhu, but especially in Vampire the Masquerade, where you don't want to spell things out. You want to leave shadowy gray areas so that players and storytellers can explore those areas. But it can be difficult when some of your audience just is just not used to reading any subtext or the implications of things. They take the word as written as I guess what people call canon or law, and that's that. And that's not their fault, and it can lead to gatekeeping behavior and all that. I think that's one of the reasons V5 very much doesn't put the lore center stage. That it's a background issue, is so the subtext in some way can become text.
I have to say, one of my biggest pet peeves, I did a military history degree, and it personally helped me quite a lot, because doing history you have to look at both sides of the sort of story, basically, and
the motivations of the author.
Yeah, exactly. So there's I'm trying to think of examples. There's some books, and the name of the author completely escapes me. I was very much into sort of Napoleonic history and stuff, and you had the Battle of Waterloo, and it's deemed as this big British victory. We beat the French and won the war and stuff. And then there's a set of books, and it's called Waterloo Campaign: The German Victory, and it's basically about, because a lot of the British Army were King's German Legion, and then obviously you had the Prussians, you had Hanoverians, you had a lot of Germans, and they don't get their sort of it's just seen as a British victory, not as a sort of a German victory. And I kind of like when people do that sort of thing. They sort of kind of they flip the sort of the what's the word, the known, not the known history, the sort of canonical history, and kind of go, well, this is kind of what it is. And doing my history degree, it was very much a case of, so this is what you're told, but is there another side to it? And we used to have a professor who would sort of go, right, you are, I don't know, he sort of, like, one example he did one, he says, World War II, you're the Allies, you're the Nazis, what's happening, why are you doing this and stuff? And like, you had the art, I wasn't on the Nazi side, but it was just basically, you had to basically make an art, even though you fundamentally disagreed with everything they were about. It was all about making you being able to see the other side of the proverbial coin, as it were. And this is the long way around to my point. I really hate it when you have history movies come out and they portray things that are completely wrong, and it's like, Hollywood's really bad at historical films sometimes, and they just go, this is how it is. And people, because they just don't want to learn any different, they don't want to know any differently, they want to be spoon-fed that they're going, okay, that's the way it is. And you have people arguing with me about history and stuff, and I was like, but that's not how it is. It might have been in that film, like Braveheart's a prime example of just historical blasphemy and stuff, but it's just like, this is what happened. It's not what it's not what happened, and that's not the way he was, and blah 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 blah. But people just want to believe that, and that frustrates me slightly, because people will just read it or will just watch it, and they will take that as canon and not go any deeper. And I personally think a lot of the world's woes would be fixed if people could see a bit more on the other side of the coin. Unfortunately, countries you live in, nearly every single country, irrespective of your sort of maybe recent neutrality or known for being a good country, inverted commas, you've probably done a lot of bad shit in your past, and people completely gloss over that. And I think it's very much something that people need to understand and accept, especially in the UK. We've done a lot of bad stuff in the past, and you just have to accept it. That's something you've done. Doesn't mean you have to dwell on it. Doesn't mean you have to not be apologetic for it, but you need to understand that was where you came from, and this is who you are now. And I think having stuff where people are just sort of spoon-fed it is frustrating, because it sort of paints a picture that isn't real, and that's, I think, where you get really sort of strong. This is completely off topic, by the way. I'm sorry, apologies. I should have gone off on a bit of a rant, but you go off on these sort of like you get very sort of strong nationalistic and patriotic views based on one-sided stories, and I think you need to look at things more deeply. If you find something, personally, if I learned something, if you were to tell me something, I go, that's interesting, and I would go out and I would pick the article that argues the counter, just so I have an even sort of view on that. And yeah. Sorry. Sorry.
Matt Rant.
Yeah, Matt Rant. No, Matt Rant. Yeah, just very, yeah.
Well, I mentioned critical analysis plays an important role for you in many ways in both sides of your writing career, both as energy security and also in RPGs. You kind of have to balance everything out, very much so.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
I imagine critical analysis plays an important role for you in both sides of your career.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, for strictly on the RPG side, I can say that people have to buy into this reality, and this reality has certain rules, and that is really the power of lore, and you really see it nowadays in video games. That usually the video games that have the strongest following and the most dedicated followings are the ones that have some kind of lore, whether that's Five Nights at Freddy's or Undertale or what have you, Dark Souls. They have an interesting story internally that you yourself can internalize while playing the game, and that will affect how you play in a sense because you've internalized certain ideas and roles. And so I can understand why on some level there can be like a fear of not having enough lore, or that your lore doesn't mismatched somehow with the internal lore of the other people playing, because then you get the sense that you're not playing the same game. You're not playing the same, mental world. And critical analysis is very important because you have to basically, while writing, say, well, what would this Lasombra think about the Sabbat basically trying to erase clan identity? As a Lasombra who's stayed in the Sabbat and is not going to join the Camarilla like some of his fellows, like how is he going to think about the Sabbat's kind of push that clan doesn't matter? From coming from a clan who used to be on top and is now kind of on the bottom. Is he going to like that? Is he going to hate that? And what is going to be his process when he comes to his conclusion? And in our book on the Vault, we do that with all the clans. We kind of have a section called Anti-Tribu, because the Sabbat basically believes that clan identity is bad, and that they're all just vampires under Cain and Lilith and all that. But how does that work? What do the clans and members of that clan think about that? And we break that down clan by clan. And that requires a lot of critical analysis and thought of the old lore and the current lore. And it's important because in a sense, even in our daily lives, we live in a virtual world. We live in a world that's not real. Like we don't go and hunt our food. We don't build our houses. We don't do any of that stuff. There's a lot of stuff that we do, say, think, which is based upon an image of reality, but not reality. Like when a news reporter tells us something, we are taking it on faith that they're not lying to us. We never witness these car accidents. We don't witness these plane crashes or terrorist atrocities, whatnot. And nor probably would you want to. But if you trust the system and take it on faith, then you're living in that reality where those things occurred with everyone else. And that's why it can be very jarring to meet someone who has a different idea of the lore than you do, because it's almost like meeting someone who believes in a conspiracy theory in the real world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So someone who doesn't know, all the vampire lore that you know from 20, 30 years of playing vampire, when they start talking about vampire, you're like, well, no, that's, that messes with your internal logic, your vision of reality. And that can be difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was reading the One Ring role-playing game called Rulebook today, and it came up with a great idea for lore, which is assume everything before is by an unreliable narrator.
Right. Yeah.
And I thought that was genius because they brought the writing cadres gave an example of Dwalin in the Fellowship of the Ring, not Fellowship of the Ring, sorry, in The Hobbit. He goes from being saved by a hobbit from the trolls to, at the end of the book, being this kind of axe-wielding fury berserker.
Right.
And it kind of like, well, how did that happen? And said, or maybe it was because this is a book that was written by Bilbo Baggins, and it was his version of the events that happened. And basically any version is purely from a single perspective and is not sort of like the neutral third party.
Oh, is this to stop you getting bogged down in sort of Lord of the Rings lore and stuff?
Exactly. And I think like, though, it's kind of, that's what you need to do with any sort of established lore, is really kind of approach it as like, did it happen? Or maybe it could have happened like this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you always have to think of who is telling me this.
Yeah.
And if you don't have an answer to the who is telling you that, then you have to assume that that narrator has a reason for hiding their identity and therefore their biases. And once you do that, like in our book, we make some changes, not really changes, but there's some parts of Tremere lore we don't want to delve into in our book that were presented mostly in Dark Ages and a few clan novels. And so we wanted to give permission, I guess is the best way to play it, to players and STs to consider that stuff unreliable. So we found ways not necessarily to change the lore, but to make things more ambiguous. Like we We refer to Goratrix, the famous Tremere betrayer of the Sabbat. We talk about the House Goratrix in the book and how Tremere and Tribu work and all that. And we present Goratrix with she, they pronouns, while traditionally they were presented as strictly, male, he, him pronouns in some of the old books. But there's a lot of lore associated with Goratrix, which is very problematic. Could be considered, misogynistic or even homophobic on some levels, that we really didn't want to move forward into our book, and I don't know how V5 officially is going to deal with that material. They haven't, I guess, they haven't touched it, maybe, I don't know why. But we didn't want to bring that forward into our book while making Goratrix such an important character in the book. I mean, they're not on every page or anything, but there's a lore sheet, about them and they're mentioned. So we wanted to fuzzy things up and present the character in a way that made more sense. Also, the name is feminine in most language conjugates, so it is what it is on that level. But we never reveal their gender. Like, we reveal their pronouns, but not their gender. So hopefully that won't be too big of a controversy.
Yeah, I remember Mage, the M20 line, kind of took the rather than kind of baking in the law set, they basically gave 3 interpretations of each law element. I thought it was great, and how it would impact the game. For example, it was the Future Fate section where it went the Avatar storm. Is it still here? Yes. Okay, then there's this happen. Is it still here but milder? Yes, and this happens. Is it here? No, it just passed, and now we can get into the Umbra and beyond without any problems. So it really kind of give 3 different interpretations of each element of the law.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can't have everything.
Yeah.
In revised, there was the Withering.
Yeah,
which is talked about in the clan novels mostly, isn't really discussed so much in the actual RPGs. But basically, kind of a flip side of the Beckoning, where instead of the elders disappearing, they're getting, weaker, and the curse of Cain on some level has weakened. So the vampiric powers in general are weaker. That, as far as I understand, is not mentioned at all in V5.
No.
But it was something that was presented in the clan novels, was an issue, was kind of the forefront of Gehenna. And of course, in older editions, they do Gehenna, the antediluvians appear and start eating people, and close down the whole shop to create Requiem. So obviously that's not touched upon in V5. This isn't in a sense, it's not a post-Gehenna war. It's post-Gehenna world. It's a Gehenna world. This is what the world looks like as Gehenna begins, in a sense.
Yeah.
With again, back to me being a complete noob and not understanding, the Sabbat, you're saying are effectively the bad guys, inverted commas. Are they? So the whole game is you're trying to keep your humanity and you're trying to not be known as a vampire by the general public and stuff. Are they completely against that? Are they just literally, I'm a fucking vampire, and they just go out and eat people and stuff, or drain them of blood?
Yeah, I mean, so I worked on a Requiem book back in the day called Belial's Brood. And Belial's Brood had the same kind of thing, where they were the bad guy vampires, and they didn't care about hiding, and they wanted to be vampires and blah blah blah. And how does that work? When we made it, a playable faction in Requiem. So basically, one thing that we kind of hit upon in Belial's Brood, and I feel the Sabbat book in some ways hits upon it as well, which is that they don't care about mortals, and in some senses they don't even care about other vampires. So they're not out there breaking the Masquerade to break the Masquerade. They don't particularly care about the Masquerade. They will hide when it suits their agenda, but breaking the Masquerade is not their goal. Taking over the mortal world now is not their goal. That's, after the antediluvians are defeated. The first step of taking over the world is, killing the people who control it today, which, shouldn't be surprising. And as far as the Camarine Anarchs are concerned, they only seek them out when it's in their larger interest. They no longer get into this, piddling fisticuffs just to, prove a point or whatnot. So the idea is their concern are vampiric concerns, not their past mortal identity. So their concerns are destroying the antediluvians. And if there's a Camarilla vampire or an Anarch vampire they think might be related to or know the location of a Methuselah or some other elder vampire, then that guy is on their target list. But they're not going to roll into a Camarilla city and start burning buildings just to get the TV cameras rolling, because that doesn't interest them. They have a goal in mind. And as far as a side point to your question, which is V5 is focused on humanity and the beast and all that, we kept all those V5 systems in the Black Hand playing the Sabbat because they're so elegant. The hunger system, the touchstone system, even the humanity system. It's all in there still. But the way we redeveloped it, because we don't want to get back into path ratings and all that, and you spending experience to be more on your path. We didn't really feel that served any goal other than giving you a sink for your really hard won experience points. So what we did is we redefined humanity for a Sabbat vampire. Once you're on a path, your humanity is no longer your moral compass or any of that stuff. It is strictly a rating of your ability to retain your personal mortal identity. So when you're on a path, as your humanity rating sinks, your ability to kind of remember who you were as a mortal degrades. A Zemese with a humanity of 2 probably would no longer remember their original mortal face after shifting it around so many times over the years. And for touchstones, which are usually living people and can only be living people in the base game, in our book we basically replace them with the rite. So once you get a path conviction, you have to link it up with a Sabbat rite, one of their sacred rituals, and if those rites are disrupted, disrespected, threatened, if implements central to those rites, such as the Valdry chalice or whatnot, or the sacred weapons used in a monomancy, are stolen or destroyed, they harm you just the way it would if a touchstone was. So we wanted to keep all those elegant systems and give reasons why the Sabbat could operate, and not just, whoa, the Masquerade's broken because you're playing Sabbat, without it breaking the internal logic of the game.
All right.
Yeah, there's almost sort of like a tactical reason for not breaking the Masquerade in the technical sense, because with the Second Inquisition out there, the global security services and targeting blank bodies, because vampires do not generate heat signatures. With the firepower that a Second Inquisition team can lay down, or more accurately, very special forces groups can lay down. Do the Sabbat really want to start antagonizing and having a fight on 2 fronts against the Mephilusas and the global intelligence agencies as well? It's just not a tactical, logical sense. It does not make tactical sense.
And again, I'm interested. I'm learning. Who are these other people? What was the name of them? The
Second Inquisition.
No. What you meant they were sort of going against the
the Mephilusas.
Antediluvians.
Yes, Antediluvians. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Who are they?
Oh, they're the founders of the vampire clans, basically. So they may be mythological, they may be real, but there are vampire clans. They're pretty distinct and obvious, and not only mechanically enforced, but thematically enforced in the story. And so the first vampires who started those strains, those bloodlines, are called the Antediluvians, the vampires who came before the flood, as described in the Bible, basically.
All right.
They're also known as the third generation, the progenitors, that kind of thing. They're kind of ancestor worshipped in parts of the Camarilla. They're considered a myth by most other vampires, and in the Sabbat, not only are they real, but they're basically immortal, unstoppable, unkillable blood gods that they will have to find some, mythological or divine or profane loophole to kill.
Yeah, I mean, they have, maybe possibly technically killed one of them with Zaprusa, the Ravnos Antediluvian.
Right. Well, I mean, in the Week of Nightmares lore sheet and the write-up and the lore, it's presented as, the originator of the Ravnos clan, and the new Ravnos clan discipline has to do with if you sleep in one place too often, you burn up. So that's kind of the implication, but whether that was actually the Avnos Antediluvian or not is never truly confirmed. But that is what people say. But as far as the Sabbat is concerned, Antediluvians cannot be killed and have not been killed. As far as our book, I should say, in the Storyteller's Vault. So in official canon, they don't really talk about too much. In the V5 Sabbat book, I actually did write the section of the Antediluvians as a thematic element, and I use a lot of those seeds to kind of expand upon in our community content book, which is basically like, how do you kill something that can't die? We also kind of delve into the Lasombra, how they defected from the Sabbat, and perhaps one of the reasons they defected is because of because their conceit to leadership, that they killed their antediluvian, was a lie, and now everybody knows it. And so by being exposed in that way, their leadership was now contested on all ends. And Sombra being Lasombra, they decided they would rather be somebody else's shadow. And once the light was shined on them, they disappeared. It is an interesting concept of how do you keep people fighting what you admit is an unwinnable war, and what are their thought processes? What is their faith like to do that?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, do you have any plans for V5 and other role-playing games plans for the future?
Yes, well, the Second Inquisition book, which I wrote on, which, yet again, let me use some of my real-world experience, is coming out. It was with Kat Evans and Kenneth Haidt, and I believe Kenneth also has a background in international affairs and such. And of course, he wrote Knight's Black Agents and several other books that
That's a fantastic game.
It is a really good book. And other like paramilitary operations hunting vampires. So that's coming out in I think in mid-March. So that's a V5 canon official book, and I think that should be pretty interesting.
Is the Second Inquisition as a playable antagonist, or is it purely a storyteller antagonist?
That book is purely storyteller. That book is storyteller focused. The Second Inquisition is presented as antagonist. There are no rules in there to play a Second Inquisition Hunter. Hunter 5th edition is coming out.
That's true.
But of course, that focuses on more, not, I won't say street level, but definitely on more individual groups of hunters, not the Second Inquisition, which is basically a global conspiracy which is misusing government resources to hunt vampires and do other things. Because as with all mortal institutions, especially those in an illegal global conspiracy, they are not going to use those powers just to hunt vampires once they have on them. They have their own interests that they're going to go about, and that can, I'm sure that blunts their efficiency in the whole vampire hunting thing.
Did you ever watch the BBC 6-part TV series called Ultraviolet? Not the Mila Jovovich film, the 90s TV series.
I've heard of it. And I know it's been it actually has been referenced to me a few times, but I don't actually think I've ever seen it. No, I don't think so.
It's a fantastic TV series. It's basically, what if there was a government-sanctioned department of MI5 tasked with hunting vampires, and it was great because it was like how do you kill someone that is effectively unkillable? Right. And they never mentioned vampires. They never used the V word. It's always like code 5s, because Roman numeral for 5 is V, and just really neat touches of like on what it would mean as a person to go around and hunt a vampire that is not believed. So yes, if you get the chance, really do recommend it. Absolutely love that TV series.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. And as far as the Storyteller's Vault's concerned, we're hoping we've had very good success with this book so far. Very good. Our reviews are very good, and I think it's hit Electrum Seller, which is 250 copy benchmark on Friday, and it's only been out, I guess, 2.5 weeks. So we were very happy with that. So building off of that, we're gonna write some scenarios, some like adventures where for Sabbat packs. We've contacted some other, authors who've worked on the Vault before and on Vampire, and we're talking with them to see how they can basically use what's in our book, so that there will be adventures to play as Sabbat packs. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel if you're new to Vampire or new to the Sabbat.
Could we also expect a player's guide to Second Inquisition? Maybe.
I don't know about that. That would be a very thick book, I think.
Right.
So I'm not quite sure. I would have to find a lot more than just 2 other authors for that. For this book, I reached out to Saskia Liddick and Rachel Judd to help me write this, because they've both, Saskia, I've worked with her on several projects, including V5 projects, though I think we're on NDA for those. And Rachel, of course, has worked on Chronicle of Darkness books, and has a lot of books on the Vault. I mean, incredible bibliography on the Vault. So I got the right team together for the Second Inquisition. I don't even know who I would ask. Yeah.
I don't know if your bookshelf would take a book that big, Pete. It's buckling as it is, I think. You can see the bow.
They won't let us print on the Vault, so no fear. The bookshelf will be all right.
I'll make space. But no, I mean, I remember reading the core V5 book and thinking, the vampires sound great, but the second Inquisition sound fantastic. So I'm thinking, we'd like to get into something like that. But again, as you say, we have the Hunter's 5th edition coming out at some point, but that is again more independent groups rather than a global security network. But yeah, so and other than V5, what else have you got planned coming up?
For V5, I don't think anything. I have written some stuff, but I'm under NDA. Other than the Second Inquisition book, there. Hopefully, those projects will be announced soon. I think there's some announcement planned in the next few weeks, but I'm not quite sure if it's for that book. But there is a lot more V5 material coming out. I mean, Renegade and PDX have a lot of interesting things coming out, and not just books. I know New York by Night, the actual play, kind of I want to say sequel, but definitely the follow up to LA by Night. Jason Carl's incredible actual play of V5. So I'm very much looking forward to that, and what that does with all this new material. Because I mean, he started LA by Night, when there weren't a lot of V5 books on the shelves, So I'm sure he had some, insight to the meta plot from behind the scenes, of course. But it's a lot easier to follow along and add stuff to the story when people have, the books. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Yeah.
So, Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, Sabbat the Black Hand is currently out now.
Yes. Sabbat the Black Hand is currently out now. You can buy that, from the Renegade store or the Storyteller's Vault. And our Storyteller's Vault book, The Black Hand Playing the Sabbat, not to confuse anyone.
The Player's Guide.
The Player's Guide, let's say, is also on the Storyteller's Vault. And there's a lot of very good Sabbat content on the Storyteller's Vault. I mean, obviously, I love my book the most. But there are several, there was a real hunger for it by the fans. So there's several books on there as well. Yeah.
Okay, give them a go. I have to say I'm quite interested. It's like Pete's sort of kind of dragging me into this sort of thing. So I had Mage, I've had Mage one week, and now I've got sort of Vampire the Masquerade another. So I'll have to have.
I'll get someone from Werewolf lined up next, Matt. Don't worry.
Yes. Okay. Well, it's been really interesting talking to you. Apologies again for the dropout in the middle there, but hopefully it will all be stitched together when I.
Well, I wouldn't have believed you guys were in the UK if there weren't weather problems. So
Yeah, no, that's it. Hashtag weather UK. Just the way it is. But yeah, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. For tonight, I've been Matt Geary. With me has been Peter Allison.
Good night, everybody. Take care of each other.
And Khaldoun Khelil.
Bye. Thanks so much. This was a lot of fun.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.